So yes, I would say we start. First of all, I'm very pleased and welcome you today. Today, our goal is to give you a little bit more insights on the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. And it seems like we have more than 500 join us today. So it seems like it's still a topic everyone is very busy on. Before we start, some organizational things. The webinar will be recorded, so you will receive everything afterwards, no worries, so you can relax and listen to Markus and me. Furthermore, on the right-hand side, you have a chat, so you can ask questions. We have a session Q&A at the end, and Markus and I will try to answer as many questions as possible. If we are not able, because of the time, we will send it afterwards. So hopefully every single question will be answered then. So yes, that you know who you have in front of you today, we like to introduce ourselves. So my name is Tanja Riley. I'm working as a senior strategic account manager for almost over 7 years at EcoVadis. And in my daily work, I'm working with large companies, but also mid-sized companies to see how we can bring sustainability into their supply chains and procurement processes. And as you can imagine, for more than 1 year, this is a topic daily on my agenda. I think there are still a lot of questions on the company, but also on the supplier side. And hopefully we are able to bring a little bit more light into that today. For those who don't know EcoVadis, EcoVadis is an international rating agency. So we are more than 1,500 employees today. And with technology and big human power, we help customers to bring sustainability into their processes and procurement. And but lucky me, I'm not alone today. So I have Markus with me. And Markus, I think you can introduce yourself much more better than I.
Tanja, thank you so much. Such a pleasure to join you again for this webinar and to work with you on this. So my name is Markus Löning, and I've been working on human rights due diligence with my team for 8-9 years now. I had a career in politics, and I was the Human Rights Commissioner of the federal German government, actually at the time when the UN guiding principles were adopted by the UN Human Rights Council. And I thought it's a good idea to help companies, to set up a company that will help companies understand what human rights means and where they have an impact on human rights and how they can mitigate risk if it is an adverse impact. So that's basically what my team and I are doing. We help companies assess where they are regarding their risk exposure, regarding their management capacity to mitigate these risks. And then we help them establish human rights due diligence management systems. And that, of course, is something that is partly overlapping, but partly also not overlapping with what Tanja and EcoVadis are doing. So we do work together with clients here and there, and it's always good cooperation also to exchange ideas and views, because at the end of the day, it's all about advancing human rights and making companies and the economy as a whole more sustainable and also more resilient for the future. So great having you all here, and looking forward to this.
Yeah, super happy to have you, and to be honest, you're really an expert, and I think it brings values to the audience as well. So let's have a look to the agenda, what we want to give you an overview today. So first of all, we want to get a little bit more infos about human rights in a global context, because I think it's quite interesting also to learn a little bit more here. Then we will break it down to the regulatory landscape and also outlook. A lot of things are happening these days. Then we will go to the LKSG and legal requirements. Many of you are already familiar with that, but we will have a closer look at that. But then we want to also make the point to how can we practical implement it in management systems, and what kind of experience and best practices we already have with our customers. What do we see day by day? What maybe can help you if you start that journey now? And at the end of the day, of course, we are able to have a Q&A session and to answer all your questions. So before we start, because we have so many people and we don't see you, you see us, we want to learn a little bit more about you. So we have 2 polls for you to get to know you a little bit more better, maybe also to have the right topics we want to address. So maybe we can start with the first poll, and this is about: are you here as a supplier or as a company? Or are you affected by the Supply Chain Act from a supplier perspective or from a company perspective? So I hope everyone sees the polls, and you have a few seconds to give us a little bit more info. So maybe we can see the result of the first poll. I don't see it so far.
I'm jumping in, so it's 34% saying supplier and 66 are from a company perspective affected by the Supply Chain Act.
Okay, that's good to know, because then we can also have both views, because of course suppliers are also affected. They get a lot of requests and they need to understand what are the expectations, but also companies of course need to understand or struggling, where can I start, what makes sense, what are the first easy topics. So then maybe we start with the second poll, because we also want to understand where are you in the process at the moment. And it would be great if someone also gives me then the feedback, because to be honest, I don't see the poll, but it's no big thing. It's just that we learn a little bit more about you. So I think maybe we are ready to go.
Yes, we are. We got 4% responding that they are advanced. We got 20% that says well positioned, 25% moderately positioned, so almost 50% in the above moderately positioned. We have 42% saying in planning, under construction, and 9% nothing planned or set up yet.
Great, thanks. I think, Markus, maybe also from your experience, this is what we see also at the market at the moment. Most of the customers I'm talking to, they are trying to set up the foundation, and some of them even just didn't start it because maybe they wait, but I don't know what your experience is here.
It's very similar, actually. That's also when I'm talking to clients or potential clients, most of them are actually in this bracket between in planning or well positioned. It's really interesting to see how companies that have started early because they had exposure in the media or something like that, and they already a couple of years ago started setting up human rights risk management, they still are working on the process and saying, okay, we need to get even better. So it's not something that we see, you know, it's done within a year or not even within 3 years more. It's an ongoing process, and you see companies really make real progress. And it's really interesting to see, but the overall picture is very much reflects what we see in this poll.
Yeah, so thank you to give us a little bit more insights. So maybe then we come to the first point, and Markus, maybe you can give us a little bit more insights about human rights in a global context, because I think it's such a diverse topic. So maybe we start here, that you give us an overview.
yeah, let me just, it's important before we really dive into this topic to maybe take a step back and say, why are we actually talking about all of that? I would say one of the trigger points in public, let's say in the public view, very much has been the Rana Plaza incident in 2013, which is now 10 years ago. That was really something where a lot of people suddenly realized that we are actually sourcing from countries which are far away from Europe, that we don't know anything about the poor working conditions in these countries. This incident was meeting a public audience that was very much also busy with the question of what is actually a company's obligation. Is it really purely, paying taxes, creating jobs, and creating new products, or is there more to it? Is there an accountability or responsibility of companies for things like fighting climate change, for making sure that no pollution is taking place or less pollution? And is there a responsibility for companies for working conditions in their supply chains? We can see in polls that there has been a major shift in the way that especially young people are looking at companies. And there's a huge pressure which companies feel when they're recruiting talents, for example. One of the main questions that young talents keep on asking is, so how do you behave regarding climate change and regarding your social responsibility towards people in your supply chain? And at the same time, we see that global trade has created enormous income for millions and millions of people. It has really helped raise living standards. But it's important that we look at the downside. And this is really what this is all about. We're looking at global supply chains. We believe that trade is helping people a lot, but that we also need to really look at the downsides. If we look at the numbers that we're talking about, child labor, we're talking about several millions and millions of children working. If we're talking about slave or slave-like labor conditions, international organizations say there's 40 to 50 million people working in slave-like conditions, for example. So these are human rights issues where we can say this is not something we can ignore, whether we're a private citizen or a company, and no company can actually build a business model based on exploitation of people to such an extent. So that's the background of this whole deliberation. And then with the UN Guiding Principles in 2011, then step by step we had more and more legislation. We're going to look at that in the next slide. But I think the key point here is that if companies want to build a resilient business, they need to address this. And minimum compliance is not good enough. That's not going to work, because you have to also convince your consumers, your investors, the new talents that you want to onboard, that you are really being part of a solution and not part of the problem. That said, I would say let's move to the legal development, because very often people tend to forget. They complain about these laws, there's so much red tape and so complicated and everything. But actually, these laws are there because that is what the audience wants. This is what voters really want. They want to make sure that companies are held accountable and are being responsible. And this is what parliaments then vote into law.
Yeah, I think you made some good points. So first of all, I think the awareness is there since years. What I realize with my customers, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get more deeper into the supply chain, but human rights is a huge topic, and it happens every day and everywhere, not only in third-party countries of the world, to be honest. So I'm completely with you, but also what I see with my customers, it's also about resilience. So looking at, for example, the pandemic, we had the biggest issue was human rights, health and social. And so also here companies need to think about their business, and so it can bring value to many sides. So this is why we really need to keep focus on that. A CPO said to me these days, "Hey Tanya, I have the feeling it will be a roller coaster within the next years, and the LKSG is a very good starting point for us to set the right foundation and to be prepared." And this is why we now want to have a closer look into regulations. So what is the actual regulatory landscape and what is the outlook? And Markus, I'm super happy if you can give us a little bit more insights here, because I think you're dealing with that also every day, like EcoVadis.
So I can, if you look at the German flag down there in the right corner, right down there, you see that is when the German Supply Chain Act was actually adopted, and it's entering into force this year for some companies next year. Some people, management make the mistake of, oh, as Lieferkettengesetz, we'll deal with it and then we're done. That's would be a grave mistake, because this is just like a stepping stone. As you can see on this map, there's other laws that are, there's a Dutch law, there's a French law, there's a Swiss law, there are laws in other countries, there are laws in other countries being discussed. The German law is just one of these laws. And let's say the good news is that there will be a law at the European level, so companies don't have to deal with lots of different laws in all the different EU member states. And also there's a chance that if the European Union, with 450 million consumers, very strong economy, if the European Union adopts standards on human rights due diligence, that this will be standard setting way beyond the European Union, and that it will give a point of orientation also for companies that are trading with the EU or are producing for partners in the EU. So basically my message is, look at the German law now, but take it as a good preparation for what's coming at the European level. There will be a reporting directive that's already clear. There will be a due diligence directive, which is still under debate, but there's also a lot of different regulations from the financial markets. So you may have heard about the EU taxonomy and other laws that are regulating sustainable finance. So there will be a lot of pressure from the regulatory, but also from this finance side. So prepare yourself for something that is going to take up some work, but which is also, and that I think is the approach to take, a very good way of making your business more future fit, more future proof, and more resilient, of establishing different kinds of supplier relations and also different kinds of relations with consumers and investors. So I think the legal development should always be taken into account, and after complaining about it for a moment, think about what it can actually do to make your business more sustainable and more profitable in the medium term.
Yeah, I think this
there are
makes
questions
clear.
about details. I'm happy to answer. Sorry, Tanya.
No worries. I think this also makes clear why the CPO said it will be a roller coaster, because so as a conclusion, regulatory are here to stay. It's not that they will go away. More global complexities to come before convenience, and less costly to anticipate compliance. So better be proactive than reactive, right? So it's an opportunity to create value for companies.
And maybe we should also add that, this is not just a European thing. Japan is just creating a national action plan. The US have laws in place. Canada is discussing laws. India has a national action plan. Thailand has a national action plan. So there's a lot of countries around the world that all see that this is a good way of leveraging the human rights situation in their countries. And more governments understand that and see this as a positive thing.
Yeah, I think we will see 3 global regulations, so the European, maybe the US and the China. So I think this will happen sooner or later. So I think the LKSG is a good starting point to prepare companies for themselves. So let's have a short look at the 5 key elements of the German Supply Chain Act and what does it mean for companies. So maybe Markus, also you can give us a little bit more insights here, because this is what everyone needs to.
Yeah.
Are you still there?
Yes, I can hear you now. So you're frozen for a bit. So the good news is that all of these laws are based on the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. They have also been adopted by the OECD and the guidances, the different guidances the OECD is giving. So the core processes are always the same. So if you establish a process for the German law, you will be able to meet the European law, most of what the European law is probably going to request. And you will also be able to answer, for example, questions by US Customs and Border or others, because you know your risks and you know what you have in place to mitigate risks. And the key elements are, there needs to be a statement by the board. So there should be clear guidance of saying, we are committed to respecting human rights, and this is how we're going to do that. That is the key of what needs to be in this policy statement. It's a good sign to the outside world, but it's also very important to give this inside, this sign into the company, and also give the resources needed to really implement that. I just had a conversation today with one of our clients that, yes, he had a conversation with the chairman of his board saying, we will need to upgrade the people in the number of people in the sustainability department to really make this happen, because it does take knowledge and it does take work. So policy statements, the first thing. Second thing, if you're talking about risk, you have to identify your risk. Where are my risks? You need to know that. Sounds easy, but in reality is quite some work, and we're going to talk more in detail about that, how to do that. And then once you identify the risk, very obviously you need to do something that they don't materialize. So reduce the probability of this risk materializing. That's the third key element. Then key element number 4 is something where companies sometimes find it difficult, especially if they're not publicly listed. You need to be open and transparent about what you're doing. So what kind of risks did we identify? What systems have we set up? How are we mitigating risks? And it's more than just public reporting under a law. This is a communication tool, because if you are good at doing that, and if you're using the information you're gathering from this process to also communicate with investors, to communicate with talents, to communicate with your consumers that buy your product, this is also an opportunity to create trust. But it does take some mind change in some communication departments, which I've come across, to be honest. And the last thing that is really important, have whistleblower mechanisms in place. People in your supply chain, if they are exposed to a risk or to a violation of their rights, they need to know where they can complain and what they can do to stop a violation taking place. This is a really important part of the whole human rights due diligence system, but it is also not as easy as it sounds in the first place to develop and install these. That's just a few words on the key elements of a human rights due diligence system.
Great, thank you so much. So looking at these key elements and looking where my customers are, of course, looking at the EcoVadis solution, the policy statement for human rights is something out of scope for us, also the whistleblowing system, but all the key elements in the middle, this is fully supporting that. But interesting to see that already some of the companies did their first reporting to the public, even if it's not necessary today. So we see some companies are super engaged. But one question, Markus, for the whistleblowing is because you said it's super important. Our companies are also using existing mechanisms they already have in place for compliance topics already, or is it a different scene they need set?
It's I usually maybe should you also say to explain what we do and what our core competencies. Basically, we help companies set up this kind of management system really from the policy statement to the whistleblower mechanism, and including all the trainings and so on. And we also then at a certain point say, okay, this is now a case where EcoVadis should take over. So we help companies identify great partners to work with and to make this part of a systematic human rights due diligence. This is also where Tanya and I come together with clients a lot of times. The question about the whistleblower mechanism is, I call it the onion approach. That's how I would do it, and how I'm usually telling my clients or our clients to approach it. Have a look at what you have. So, do you have an open door policy with the boss? You know, can you walk in and tell them something is wrong? Do you have a workers' council in place? Do you have something like a complaints hotline in place for your own people, for your own employees? That's usually the first step to take. And then you take this inside out perspective and say, okay, what are the next steps I would like to take? What are my important suppliers? What are people I could have an impact on? What are the rights holders that, you know, I could have an impact on? And how can I open my complaint system to them? That's still easy if it's, let's say, the lorry drivers that bring your goods from Hamburg to wherever in Germany. But it gets more difficult if you have changing suppliers all the time, or if you only know the agent that sits in a port somewhere and, you know, sells the goods to you. So it is quite a, let's say, a task to do something meaningful. Luckily, there are quite some initiatives out there exploring that, like the Bangladesh Accord, which is now also going to expand, or a similar accord is going to be set up in Pakistan at the moment. You see different companies also developing solutions for that. And it's really important to speak to peers also. What can we do together? Can we set up something together? You cannot, you know, put 25 phone numbers on the wall of a factory. You know, it should be one phone number. There must be a follow-up process. Someone must speak the language. So it sounds easy, it sounds very logical, but it does take an effort to get there.
And I think you made a very, very good point. What we see quite often at the moment with companies, that they think, okay, I can put it on the agenda of the compliance person and they will take care. But what you described is what we see, and we're working with customers on that also every day. You need to have the capacity. You need to be clear that it's an internal effort, and there need to be clear rules and responsibilities and commitments to make it happen. So thanks for that, Markus. For the audience, and this is only because we also sent you the slides afterwards, but we have wrote down the legal requirements regarding the sections and what does it mean from LKSG requirements, what you need to take care of. So this can be a good overview and a point where you can then internally have a discussion, what kind of actions do you need to take. So this is more for you as a follow-up and internal information, what you can use to understand it a little bit more better. So looking at the 5 key elements, of course, at the end of the day, we need to implement that in management systems. So Markus also gives us a little bit more practical information here, how you can come to that point.
Yeah, this very much reflects the 5 key elements, or the 5 key elements of the German law actually reflect these key elements, which are based on the OECD guidance for responsible business. It's basically the same, it's 6 elements in this case, because there's one more element, which is number 4, is track and implementation and results. And I think that's very important, especially also from EcoVadis' point of view. The way you establish these management systems is that it's very hard finding a starting point, because you never feel prepared. So the only thing you can do is actually start, even if you don't feel prepared. And logically, you can start with a with the policy statement by the board, which is number one in this chart, which also should entail setting up a governance system. So who's responsible inside our organization to manage human rights risks, to look at human rights risks? And basically, the German law says anyone whose responsibility might have an impact should be on board, part of this governance structure. So it can be obviously the HR people that are hiring people when it's about discrimination issues, for example. It obviously is procurement. Procurement is always there. It obviously is also compliance or legal, but it can also be internal procurement, procurement of services. So it can, all sorts of departments of a company should be engaged in this. And then you need a risk and identification, which looks at these different kinds of risk, because what works for a supplier as a risk identification might not work for discrimination in your own factory. So how do you set up a system which covers all of these potential risks? That's basically the second big task. And the second big task also means that you have to do something like a stock taking at the beginning. You need to see what are the big risks that we are exposed to and how well are we prepared to really deal with these risks. And then you set up the more granular identification risks in the second step. The third step then tells your people, a lot of training comes in there, for example, audits, or all of what you and EcoVadis are providing to clients, Tanya, is coming in there in this part of the process, the identification, but also the mitigation part and the assessment part. And then obviously, if you mitigate risk, you should know whether what you're doing is actually effective. So have I reduced risk? How do we have less incidents than we had the year before? How do we need to change the relations with suppliers? Do we need to reduce the number of suppliers, different kinds of agreements with suppliers? So there's a lot of questions around that which go beyond, let's say, the immediate assessment of the factory as such. It also is a question of relations with suppliers. So what's the economic incentive of the supplier to really say, okay, I'm going to stick to these standards because it will improve my business with the client. And so that's tracking the implementation and also measuring the results. That's something which is still a lot of in the making. So there's a lot there that you can do, but there's also a lot of data that is not yet available there. I've been talking about the communication of the efforts and also about the grievance mechanism, so I don't want to repeat it here, but it takes implementing a human rights due diligence management system takes a lot of commitment. And very often what we see, and that's a very interesting process, is that someone's starting it, usually it's the sustainability department, they're starting it, and the rest of the colleagues say, well, not for us, not interesting, more work, all sorts of things are happening. But then the more and more you engage them and you explain, why is it? What's the relation with our business? Why are we doing it? And why is your job safer if we do this well? At the end of the day, most people are convinced, because who's against human rights? And you need to give them the tools to really also track their potential impact. And that is what is happening when you're implementing human rights due diligence system.
Great, thank you for the insight. So more or less, these are also the points we are covering. We have the same challenges, and what I really encourage companies to do when they try to identify and assess risks, they try to do it by themselves. And I have many customers, they say, okay, Tanya, next time we need a tool for that, because this was a nightmare of work to bring all the data together. And I really encourage you, there are tools for identifying risk in a large with large number of suppliers, which helps you to come to that point much more faster, and maybe use your capacity in other topics like communication efforts and so on, or also get your suppliers on board, that they are aware what you are doing there, instead of trying to do everything by yourself. It needs technology in many cases. Okay,
that's a very important point.
Yes, so this is what I see day by day, and I think they really use their capacity sometimes for things where I think, okay, this is more efficient if you use technology, and this is where you cannot use technology, and maybe you put your focus there. Why we doing this today? We also want to give you some best practices. Of course, at the end of the day, it's just the start of the LKSG. We have some experience. I think next year we will have much more. But what I see quite often with customers is that they say, oh, wow, we have 8,000, 10,000 suppliers or 5,000 suppliers. What does it mean for our organization and from our capacity building? Do we really need to take care of 20,000 suppliers now? So normally, and this is best practices, what I see with my customers, and I want to give you an example to see, okay, what is the real workload. So I had the case, they had 4,200 suppliers in total, and you need to do screening for everyone, even if it's a flower shop next to you, but maybe this is not the most critical supplier to use. So first of all, use tools, screen your suppliers, 100% of your supply base. In this case, it turns out that they identify high risk and strategic suppliers, 452. So it reduced the number. These one, they then did a deep risk or due diligence process for, and it came out that 88 suppliers really had issues where they need to set up corrective action plan and improve together with the suppliers. So please don't be scared about huge numbers. We all know you have a big number of suppliers in your portfolios, but not everyone is the one you start immediately with. So normally companies look, where do I have the biggest impact? What is critical for me? And what can I drive alone or in initiatives? So only to give you a little bit more feeling about numbers of supplier portfolios, what we are dealing with at the moment. And here tools can help to come to a good first starting point. And these tools helps you to set up a supplier selection strategy. So this is one example I want to give you on the way. The other point was I already have some customers, they have implemented processes. So this is an example of a company in a telecommunication sector, and they said, okay, 100%, of course, we do a screening for. Then it turns out the red ones where we have high gross risk, we directly send them into the rating process. And based on the result of the rating, what is then the net risk, they defined score levels. And behind that, they set concrete actions. So someone with a very good score, it's okay if they do a reassessment on a yearly base. If they have a medium score, they decided to set up corrective action plans. If it's low score, they also will look if there is an opportunity or an option for an on-site audit needed. With the medium risk suppliers, they decided, okay, this is not necessarily that they immediately do a rating, but we will set up CSR clauses and we will monitor the CSR key topics on a regular basis. And for the ones who are not permanent, they also say, okay, you need to sign a code of conduct. We set up general CSR clauses. We do an ongoing monitor. But if there's a whistleblowing message, immediately we take action. So first step is they will go into a rating. But on the other hand, of course, we need to check what kind of case is it. So these are two examples, what we see already with our customers. try to think about how you can bring that into your processes, that you can live that. And this, of course, involves then the internal stakeholders who are relevant for that process. Only two examples, and maybe Markus, you also have some more. One point I really want to mention, because I saw it was very successful, you mentioned trainings. I think training is a super essential part when you start that journey, because very often suppliers are afraid, okay, oh wow, I need to send them data, they are doing a rating or an on-site audit, but what is when the result is not so good? What happened then? So this maybe sometimes is then blocking suppliers, and they push back because they don't know what happened. So be very clear also with your suppliers. Why are you doing that? Why are they in scope? And do with the results, because at the end of the day, we want to grow together with our suppliers. We want to become better. And I saw webinars with one of my supplier, and they also spread it or develop the webinars together with us in many languages, because if you have suppliers in third party, it's good if you do it in mother language as well, because then also the acceptance and the awareness is much more higher. So, and now maybe Markus, also you can speak a bit out of what you experience on a daily basis.
Yeah, we talked last time we talked, Tanya. We talked exactly about this issue. We discussed this issue of training, and because we very often get this question. So, at what point do you start training your people? And as Tanya was pointing out, it actually makes a lot of sense to train at a very early stage, because it will make people aware of what this is about. It will onboard people. We just rolled out a e-training with a big industrial client, for example, where we had one training which was addressing people on the shop floor, which was more of a gamified training, which was really helping people, or even, for example, which is even designed for shop floors where people have limited reading skills and things like that, but they should still be able to understand fire and safety issues, for example, health and safety issues. So we have trainings for really this part of the supply chain, where those that are working on the shop floor get trained in a language and in a way that they can really understand what this is about and what their possibilities and their rights also are. And then we have trainings for functions where we train people in procurement or in HR in different levels. And if you do that early in the process and you onboard especially people at the management level, of the middle management level of a company, you will see that rolling out the due diligence process becomes a lot easier, because people know what this is about. So training is really one of the key elements, although it's not really mentioned in any of the laws. But so we decided, for example, to set up a learning academy, which is really focusing on training people on human rights challenges that they have. That's one part of the implementation. It's not everything, but it is a very important part. And then for the other parts that,
oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Tony.
Go ahead. No, for the other parts.
What I wanted to say for the other part is people sometimes feel overwhelmed, and then they say, "Oh wow, this is this looks like a very good solution." But then you start thinking, diving into, and you see, well, it is not an easy thing. It's not something you do on a Sunday afternoon. It does take effort to really also dive into this and really understand. Think about what are the steps if we find a high-risk supplier. How do we deal with that? What is it mean for an ongoing supplier relation? Maybe a company that you have been working with for 20 or more years, you know the people, and so how do you deal with it? It takes very good data, very good systems, but it also takes good management to then develop this into something which is a more solid relation, which moves your suppliers from this red bar into the yellow bar, and then hopefully into the green bar, step by step. So the implementation itself takes, as Tanya was saying, takes technology, takes good data, it takes expertise to also see what is in these data, what do these data mean. But then it also, at the end of the day, tech and data cannot replace human intelligence, human interaction, and human decision making. I believe that's an important thing to also be aware of. At the end of the day, it's about people, and whatever kind of service EcoVadis or we are providing, the responsibility and the decision stays with the company and needs to be taken by company management.
Very good point. We see it on a daily basis, and so more you also involve internal stakeholders, the more successful your program will run. This is what we see. But Marcus, interesting. We have many questions, and I really want to open the floor for the questions. And the first question is, let me check into the panel because we want to see how many we can answer. How will the implementation of the CS3D and the forced labor ban regulations impact the national laws in Germany and France? Will those national laws be replaced by transposition of the CS3D, for example, or continue to apply in parallel? So, Marcus?
So I'm not fully aware of the French law, but the German law clearly says, and that's also when we're talking to the ministry, it's very clear that the German law will be replaced by the European legislation. I mean, it would make no sense at all to have double legislation. And I guess that is true for all other EU member countries as well. And I'm quite sure that also a country like Norway, for example, or you never know about Switzerland. I would doubt that the UK will do it, but most of them will align with the European law, and those outside of the EU. Inside the EU law will be the one standard. And that's true for both, for the due diligence directive as well as for the forced labor ban, whatever that will look like in the end. It's still debated, so we'll see.
Yeah, I think we expected 2025, so Supply Chain Act, I think it's a good preparation for that. But the next question is, what are the most common asked questions you are hearing about the LKSG from businesses?
So many different questions.
Do you want to go first?
I don't know what you hear, Tanya, but one of the questions we keep on is, where should we start? And the second question is there a tool that can do it for me? So these are two questions that we're getting.
Yeah, so very often I hear, if we use EcoVadis, do we fulfill the Supply Chain Act? I said no, because at the end of the day, we can provide tools and expertise, what we do, but these are your suppliers, so you need to take action. But we help you. So this is one of the biggest questions. The other question is, very often I receive, of course, we are a rating agency. What is the response rate, and are they willing to? And of course, it's also here again. The key success factor for your onboarding rate will be also the communication to your suppliers. Why are you doing that? What will you do with the data once they did the rating? What is the value? What is in for them? So a supplier, of course, should not only do a rating, for example, for you, but they can use the rating for themselves on that journey as well. And they expect, okay, if we use solutions, we will have everyone on board. But this is work, and we need to work together. So these are the most questions I get. And where can we start? So out of our 100,000 suppliers.
For the start question, I always say, start tomorrow. Stop thinking about it, just start. And the other thing, I mean, what you've been saying about the tool, I think it's really good. You should never forget, I think that what EcoVadis is providing as a service is super helpful to approach getting, fulfilling the Lieferkettengesetz, but it's not everything the responsibility still stays on the client side. That's something that you should never forget.
Absolutely. So these are the suppliers of customers, and of course they need to take care. Another point is what I always really encourage companies to do: get together with other of your peers, speak to association, how they can help to drive that topic within the association. And of course, if you have a huge overlap, it makes sense to get together and to drive impact a little bit more faster. So we are supporting 6 sector initiatives, and we see the success of these sector initiatives, even if the start is also not so easy. You need to have clear rules, but this brings speed, and we need impact. We want impact, we need impact. Then the next question: what is the current state of the European law? When is it coming, and what would be the difference to the German law? I think some of the questions were already answered with the first one. So what I hear, and I don't know, Markus, if you are have the same info, they expected 2025, 2026, or something like that. This was the timeline I heard in some chats.
The reporting directive, that's done, that's ready. The triple D, the due diligence, that's still it's still in the making at the moment. European Parliament is deliberating its position. So we have a position, a draft by the Commission. We have a position of the EU Council, the member country governments, and now we're talking about the Parliament finding its position. At the end of the day, the 3 of them need to get together at the table and negotiate the final text. Could be difficult this time around, so I'm sure they are going to take quite some time in the course of this year to really come to a final conclusion there. It's not going to be an easy one.
The next question is: would the COP of the United Nations be enough reporting, or would another form be required?
The COP, the Communication on Progress of the UN Global Compact?
Yes. Be enough for
we are members of the UN Global Compact. So, I mean, the UN Global Compact has been is a great organization because it's like a pathfinder. It was out there early, but it's been overtaken now by the reporting laws that are out there. So the Communication on Progress is nowhere near what you really you're going to have to do under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. That takes a lot more work and a lot more development of KPIs, gathering of data, and so on. So a lot more diligence there.
The next question is: when is it necessary to have the policy statement published?
Should be out there already.
Yeah,
it's overdue.
Yes. So this is very often the case that companies think, okay, the first reporting we need to do next year, and we still have time, but some of the topics should be already addressed and published, and so normally the policy statement should be published already.
Yep. Maybe to take away some pressure, don't go crazy about it. Draft something as good as you can now, publish it, and then next year you have another look once you have established more due diligence elements, and you can come back to it and improve it. It is also part of this continuous improvement process. So don't go crazy now over it, just do something solid, but it's important to move forward.
I think for all the implementation start, and it's a journey. We are at a starting point. Can we have example of tools existing to assess our risk? Thank you. Of course, we can send it to you because there are many tools out there. Markus, you have a tool, we have a tool, but there are also other tools out there for the screening to assess risk and high volume. So I think we can share the data or an overview afterwards with the send out of the recording. Next point. So it's good to see we have many questions, but it also demonstrate that there are many questionnaires still. Does EcoVadis also for integration with other important compliance topics, such as with the FCPA or other platforms, are including ethic base and integrate both? So yes, EcoVadis is not only focusing on labor and human rights. The full scope of the EcoVadis solution for the screenings and also for the rating is that we also address, for example, environment, labor, human rights, ethic, and sustainable procurement, so the full scope. And of course, everyone takes care of different topics. So I have many companies, of course, they need to fulfill the Supply Chain Act, but at the same time, they drive internal projects with more focus on environment topics, new products, and so on. The other point is the EcoVadis method is based on international standards, and the way how we work is if there is a new law or regulation coming up, we have dedicated teams. They are in an early stage really screening the law or the requirements. They compare it to our existing methodology, and if there's a gap, we are going to implement that. So for example, human rights was already a part of our rating in the past because we have laws already in the UK or in France and now in Germany. But for example, Quecksilver was something what was not required with the other laws, so we adapt that to the methodology. So this is what we are doing on a continuous basis, and of course we are using also external international sources. So the next,
I think it's maybe to add to that point, because that's important for companies, that they need to be sure that, you know, what laws do apply to my business. And many of these laws are not so easy to understand because they address human rights. And human rights is not something that is typical on the what corporate lawyers are busy with, or legal or compliance departments. They're usually very good at other kinds of issues. So especially if you start looking at human rights, it's really important to get experts like Tanya or ourselves on board that help understand what these different human rights relating or laws focusing on human rights actually mean for the company and for the adoption. And you need to really follow all the debates all the time. It's really important. And if you feel it's too much, this is really a point where you should rely on someone that knows that, you know, what's going on there. We also, you know, we do, as Tanya is doing, you need to constantly follow the debates and really be aware of what's happening and be able to transfer it into a good management system. Yes.
Thank you for that point. Good point, Markus. Last question we are going to answer because it's nearly 3 o'clock. So would you suggest to compile a risk analysis for human rights risk and environmental risk, or would you suggest to evaluate the risk in separate analysis? I think you, in your example with the company with many suppliers, the high risk group for the both risks could be different, and therefore it could be reason to take different measures. So maybe, Markus, also your experience, I also can give insights.
So our expertise is really human rights. We do, of course, look at these 3 environmental topics that are addressed in the German law because they have an immediate impact on human rights. So there's always a connection between environmental risks and human rights. But our expertise is really human rights, and that's like 20 experts looking at that specifically. And if we need an assessment of environmental risks, we work with partners like EcoVadis or others that really understand how to assess the environmental risk as well. And these may fall apart. The risk, as the person asking the question says, rightfully, sometimes there's a high environmental risk while the human rights risk may be medium or low. That does happen, but it does correlate.
Yeah, so of course, what we see with our customers, if they start with the exercise, of course, we can set filters for the German Supply Chain Act and filter. And to be honest, of course, with the Supply Chain Act, they are focusing more on the human right topic at the moment. But depending on the business and because it's they say, okay, if we now have a look at cross risk and it will have an impact on our business, maybe also risk areas in the environment topic, also maybe there can come up a whistleblowing or whatever, or we have huge spend there. They do it then in one bucket and say, okay, let's have a look at our business. What are we? What kind of business are we in? Where do we source? And what kind of impact do we have? And of course, main focus for the Supply Chain Act will be human rights, but at the same time, they are also addressing other urgent topics also for their own business. Okay, so we still have some questions. So I'm super happy to see that you really come with all these questions. We will answer the rest in a written form after the webinar, so you will receive everything, nothing will get lost. If we forgot something, please contact us. If you have follow-up questions, we are here to help with expertise, and we do that on a daily basis, and hopefully we could give you a little bit more insight how to address that, and to give you a little bit more insights on best practices. So maybe next year we are at other points. So thank you for your attention. It was great to have you all here, and yeah, good luck, and let's drive change together. Thank you for everything.
And thank you very much, Tanja, for the good conversation we had.
Yeah, I thank you, Markus. Yeah, thank you.
Goodbye.
Take
Thank
care.
you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.